There was a big shake-up at Dreamhack Valencia's Paladins Summer Premiere Esports Championship, with expectations being soundly put into the bin, and gladly so. It was the most fun esports I'd watched for a long time, and I've watched a lot of TIs and lots of CSGO tournaments. And if you haven't watched it yet and don't want any spoilers, A, where have you been? Have you been living under a rock? And B, there will be some spoilers here, so either mute the video or flee as far as you can now. So, it wasn't just that the matches were intense, this was extra special for how much of a shake-up it brought. The Seed 2 team, which is predicted second most likely to win, was knocked out by 7th, QG Craze, the new Chinese team on the block. And they did it with a bold lineup that hadn't really been seen to that degree in the NA or EU scenes. There was a hyper-aggressive lineup, often with 2 flankers, and today I'm going to be talking about this lineup, how effective it was, if it still might be, and also using the term closest to explain that lineup, a dive comp. So what's a dive comp? It's an aggressive lineup of highly mobile champions with an aim to decimate the backlines and zone enemies from being able to approach and contest the point and payload. It has its roots in the idea of diving behind towers in MOBA games with the tactic of being able to get in quick, get a kill and get out without dying to enemy teammates or the high damage defensive towers themselves, and has further been popularized by the current meta in Overwatch, which actually has some of the abilities I shared with MOBA games and with Paladins that are parallels that can be drawn out on how they play out and why this aggressive tactic works. Most notably Zarya's bubble and Torvald's shield. So anyway, why is it effective in Paladins? Well, being aggressive and making sure to capitalize on a one team fight can lead to zoning out the enemy team, and defending a point after a wipe is easier than attacking a defended point. Mounts or horses make zoning an even bigger aspect to this game. You can essentially halt an enemy team's advance a long way away from the point. You can also disrupt how many can reach the point fast and break up an effective counter push. Generally, taking out the backline damage dealers and healers is also a priority, and being able to do that and get out of there alive is a big deal too. Though, if the timers are right and you know you can delay with demount, dying might be an option too if you're close enough to an enemy spawn and you're sure of your horse massacring potential and timekeeping skills. What was the exact lineup in Dreamhack Valencia, you might very well ask? Well, QG Craze seemed to capitalise on this dive comp early on, making a team adapt to it in the final to actually try and counter them. Key to this comp success was our resident grandpappy, Papa Torvald. Runes aligned and crotchiness put aside, his protection bubbles paired with the legendary card Field Study gave the flankers both extra tankiness in the 2000 HP shield and also extra burst damage potential with the 40% bonus damage buff for those 2 seconds. And to think we're here saying Grandpappy was winning games again. So Torvald was paired with 2 highly mobile champions. QG really liked picking up the buck with Shasha and Guagua both leaping around the entire maps at some point. I don't think they actually missed picking him up, and with those Field Study protection bubbles it gave Buck some extra needed burst damage potential he doesn't usually have, and some extra survivability to disrupt the enemy team, mount travel and backline as much as possible, but still being able to survive most importantly. Paired with that was either another flank, Eevee and Droxus, or a more mobile damage dealer, Bomb King with Accelerant, Drogos with Wormjets, Cassie with Exaction and Incitement for maximum infinite rolls. What was mesmerising watching QG play these 2 flanky champions was often how they rotated them. One would go in, get the shield disrupt, maybe get a kill, maybe finish someone off, and come back to the healer and the defensive line when they're in trouble. Then in jumps another flanker to do the same thing and keep that pressure on constantly. Paired with these was often a fairly mobile frontliner Ruckus with his Aerial Assault legendary card to allow him to jump up a 3rd time or go upwards when still, pretty much flying himself. This was also a wrecking ball when the Field Study bubble was on him, really amping up that damage potential, and some serious shredding went down in those 2-second windows. These were all backed up mostly by Ying as an aggressive healer, active in damage, applying debuffs and heals constantly, and it did seem to work well for QG most of the time, as a lot of people consider her off meta for healing range nerfs and changes leading up to those legendary cards, which took a lot away from her normal abilities, and repealing the lifelike legendary card, making it more dead-like than anything, which used to be a big heal. Interestingly, in the finals of Dreamhack, Team Cryptic disrupted QG picks by taking Torvald and running a quite aggressive lineup themselves, arguably diving too, but almost exclusively took a more single target heavy healer like Moldamba over that Ying pickup, which perhaps worked out quite well for them as they did go on to win. Against D69, QG also occasionally picked up the Grok for more damage amp and forward healing if the Ruckus was taken away from them, which worked quite well too. There were a few interchange tanks here and there and things like that. Is it still a big thing though? There are quite a few problems with this hyper-aggressive dive comp in OB54, the current version, at least the team compositions I've listed before. At Dreamhack, they were all playing Open Beta 52, where Torvald hadn't had his shields massively decreased, giving more HP instead, but not so much as the shields. Eevee, Buck, Drogus and Bomb King all received nerfs to their mobility. Buck can no longer double jump, Eevee's blink cars were reduced severely, undercutting the blink distance, Wormjets propel less, and Accelerant has been completely reworked to have no mobility effects, basically taking all of the Bomb King's flank potential from him. Personally, I feel Torvald, fitting the role of keeping ally flanks alive and giving them extra burst with field study, hasn't really changed. He does need more healing and can't just recharge his shields, but isn't a complete deal breaker. The thing is, Team Cryptic ended up winning the finals and didn't take that weaker healing Ying pickup but more damage, and took the Muldamba heal over it. And with Muldamba you can pretty much spread the heals out and get single target heals on lots of people, so you'll be healing the Torvald a lot most likely anyway. Plus you can take advantage of standing in the Gore Goo. With the flanks, I think that it could be a rotation to the more perceived meta picks of Androxus and maybe Cassie, with no changes to an infinite dodge rolls as long as you hit. Androxus did have a Darkstalker nerf, but still his Nether Step combined with being able to reset it with your reversal means that he is still pretty maneuverable. He was good before he had Darkstalker. To be honest, what I wanted to really point out here was that there seems to have been a level of diving into backlines of the enemies anyway, before this and probably after it, just to varying degrees, not so much hyper dive as it was shown in Dreamhack Valencia. Even still, the Torvald shields let you be a little bit more bold and go further than normal zoning lines you might usually hold, which often is watching the point say halfway from the objective and the spawn room. Instead, you can still get too close for comfort with the enemy squishies and do most of the disruption you did before. Just a super in your face of Buck and Eevee are harder to pull off. Again, I'd say with a single target healer like Ceres or Muldamba, you can achieve something similar to that Torvald shield in terms of survivability if your flankers are going into the thick of it and retreating after they strike for a heal away from the debuffs. And actually in Paladins, most champions have some form of mobility that allows them to go in and come out again. And to some degree you can kind of dive with all champions and knock people off their mounts, disrupt them, drag out an enemy damage dealer, fight and attack. Even say with Makoa you can dive in, get the hook, kill somebody, and shell spin out there too. Again, the mobility nerf hi-rez applied to a lot of the legendary cards has definitely had a curbing effect, but diving with mounts being such a big deal and targeting damage dealers as a priority will often pay off being more aggressive and doing damage to an enemy's backline. This patch, Fernando, Resident Knight and Barbecuer, has been given more damage potential and has been smashing up the backlines, and quite a few times I've seen a rampaging Fernando supported by a Torvald to amp him up and clutch protect him, and can be quite effective as a diver, and could make up somewhat for the others being pushed out. And I think the bottom line with being able to successfully dive is doing both the disruption and surviving so you don't end up in a 4v5 defense on the point itself, which this does give an option to. One of the biggest things worth mentioning is that often QG Craze with this hyper aggressive lineup didn't walk all over the competition. Kanga Esports was very close, often playing the point was sacrificed with disrupting, and sometimes it led to wipes and a stronger zoning line being able to be formed by a less divey team to hold and stop QG from retaking. And often you'll see the Buck and the Eevee go in a bit forlorn and die without hope. And if you don't dive successfully and don't survive, then your own spawns become staggered and you're never on an even footing with the enemy team, as you're never going to be on a 5v5 fight. But again, the enemy team, Kanga Esports, and all the teams they pretty much faced did quite divey champions themselves with a lot of mobility, like a Bomb King and a Cassie over their Torvald Buck combo, which they seem to be liking to pick up. And they do dive quite well themselves, or at least did in OB52. There's a question how much this translates to casual games and non-esports competitive. So from my Paladins, a stat site, you become more likely to lose exponentially as you add a second flank into the mix. To be fair, it could be that in these games people just don't pick tanks and healers in protest because most people don't like seeing that. Also, it does seem to rely quite heavily on the Torvald being able to keep flankers going and not to die whilst they are diving, or a strong enough healer to constantly support them as they dive in and out. Torvald 2 does have a very high win rate, although I'm not sure for the same reasons he was used in the Dreamhack matches. More the difficulty in early matches to deal with the old Torvald's massive shields and not taking Wrecker. But his protective bubbles can definitely do a lot of work in casuals if you drop in as him. In conclusion, all in all, the dive comp, if that is right to call it, we saw in Dreamhack might not be able to be completely emulated, and there are a lot of people trying to tell others not to pick Torvald as they are not China, which I'm sure is true, as I'm fairly sure most people are not a country. But it's definitely made its mark, and perhaps will be seen as a strain and tactic that needs to be counterplayed in kind with another handful of aggressiveness, or another tactic brewing in the pipeline. So what does everybody else think? Is a dive comp the right way to refer to this? Have you played around with it to any degree? Do you think it is and will be meta even with these changes? Let me know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, dive out of here if you didn't, subscribe for more of my content, and thank you all very much for watching. Until next time everybody, Joshino.